For 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, Operation Warp Speed under President Trump set the country up for success in its battle against COVID-19 going into 2021 with 2 effective and authorized vaccines, therapeutics, testing, and a national distribution network. Given that, why was the Biden administration's response to COVID in its first year full of so many stumbles, given the tools provided and systems already in place when you all walked in the door?
Congressman, thank you for the question. And I want to take you back to where we were when President Biden took office. Less than 1% of Americans had received a vaccine. And we had a situation where the efforts were not nationally coordinated. And we had to stand up an infrastructure to make sure that we get not just vaccines, but therapeutics out. There was not one single therapeutic that a medicine that any American could take that would be available orally for that individual. There were, at the time, very few provisions for treatment, the tests that people would need to take. There were no tests available to Americans that they could take at home. And things have changed. As I said in my opening testimony, today, more than 255 million Americans have received a shot in the arm. More than 560 million vaccines have been administered overall, when you count boosts and the rest. And we have now made available hundreds of millions of tests. We have ordered and paid for hundreds, and in most cases, thousands of the therapeutic medicines that some people need who have contracted COVID. Night and day. Today, we are opening up. We've gone through 2 major variants in that 1 year, and both more potent than the original natural virus. And so what we see is that progress has been made, but we're not yet out of the woods.
Thank you, Secretary. One of the big concerns to me is this past year. It appears that it was marked with a lot of chaos on the response front. There were more COVID deaths in 2021 than in 2020. In fact, by 102,882 more to be exact. And this administration started out with the vaccine, at least it was created. That's 128% more in COVID deaths in 2021 than 20. Again, the vaccines were approved whenever you all walked through that door. And conflicting guidance coming from your CDC, masking, no masking, when to open, when not to open, contributed not just to confusion, but undoubtedly to more Americans getting sick or suffering other consequences. You gave yourself $2 trillion in additional so-called COVID relief funding on top of the $4 trillion Congress had already enacted. In retrospect, might it have been a bad decision to dedicate less than 9% of the $2 trillion from the American Rescue Plan to combating COVID-19, particularly given the fact you are now asking for more money to Congress?
Congressman, first, I'd be interested in seeing your math because I don't think it's accurate in terms of how we've deployed the resources that were given to us. We know here at HHS that what we have done with the money that you've made available, first, we say thank you for those who voted for those resources because they've been indispensable, but we have used them to be able to make available those hundreds of millions of vaccines to all Americans. No American is denied a vaccine today. No American has had to pay a penny for those vaccines. We now have the therapeutic medicines that help you stay alive if you do contract COVID.
So, Mr. Secretary, I just want to know, you felt like that there was enough money in the $2 trillion bill, that how much was allocated to HHS in the $2 trillion bill that passed Congress a year ago was sufficient?
Congressman, I will take every penny you all give us, and we will make.
Was it sufficient that was passed of the $2 trillion?
We used every bit of it, and we're beginning to now run out of that gas to keep it going. And we will need more.
Thank you, Secretary. I will just say we found numerous examples, and my team would be more than happy to show that less than 9% of the $2 trillion actually went towards killing the virus. But the numerous examples that we did find was billions of taxpayer dollars being wasted, planting thousands of trees, building a high-end hotel, a spa, and golf courses, renovating a baseball stadium, new weight rooms, luxury apartments, the list goes on that was in that $2 trillion COVID package. How does spending $2 million of taxpayer dollars on planting trees in Syracuse, New York, help fight COVID?
Congressman, what I can tell you is what we've done with the money that we received and what we did.
Does planting trees in Syracuse, New York, help fight COVID?
As I said, I can speak to you what we did with our money, and we
I'll-
made very good use of the money, keeping Americans alive and healthy.
I'll take that as a no. And I also think that sending $1,400 checks to Japanese citizens living in Japan did not help stop COVID. I wonder what that's all about. But there seems to be a lot of decision makers in this administration. We have Gene Sperling as the American Rescue Plan czar. We have Jeff Zients as the COVID response coordinator. It makes me wonder who is ultimately responsible for making decisions on whether it is appropriate for state and local officials to spend $4 million building a new beach parking lot in South Carolina, or $250 million of COVID relief on state parks in Michigan. Where does the buck stop? With you, Mr. Sperling, Mr. Zients, President Biden? Who's making those decisions?
Congressman, if you have any questions about the way HHS has deployed its resources, I'm more than willing to answer those questions. We feel very confident that what we can show is that the American people are receiving real results as a result of the work that was done by HHS employees nationwide.
I appreciate that. Maybe from the prior $2 trillion COVID bill, we shouldn't have used $783 million in stimulus checks to convicted prisoners, including the Boston Marathon bomber. Since I do want to talk about resources that were delegated to the HHS in that spending bill, let's jump to that. Can you tell us how much funding your department has spent over the past year, plus to fly illegal immigrants from the border to various communities across the country?
If you're asking for the last 365 days, that might be more difficult, but I can give you an idea generally of what we have done with some of the money that we've received.
Did you use any of the money in the HHS budget to fly illegals from the southern border to other communities in the country? Yes or no?
We have an obligation, Congressman, to make sure that those migrant children who are unaccompanied by an adult have a safe place to stay while they're temporarily going through their immigration process. We house some of those. Well, we house some of those immigrant children until we're able to find a sponsor, if we're able to find a sponsor, who will house that immigrant while the child is waiting for its
So can you
hearings.
tell me within this budget, show me in this budget where you are planning to use taxpayer dollars to fly illegal immigrants from the border to various communities throughout this country, and how many taxpayer dollars do you estimate you'll spend in the months to come in such flights? Where's it at in the budget?
You can find the information under the the Office of Refugee Resettlement that deals with the unaccompanied migrant children. And what we are obligated to do by law is take possession and custody of a child once they've been placed in the hands of Department of Homeland Security. They are only allowed to keep those children for a short amount of time. We must then take them and we place them in a facility that is able to care for children. Not all of those facilities are there on the border, in American communities along the border. So we do make sure we place them, if we can, in a licensed care facility that is able to care for children.
Also, there's been a lot of conversation about money being transferred, $2 billion, in fact, that was taken from the strategic stockpile and for COVID testing that was used with illegals at the southern border. Where was the authority to do that?
So I'm not sure where you brought the strategic stockpile in, but what I can tell you is that the COVID monies that we have used, including some of the monies to address the needs of those migrant children, because of COVID, they were not immune from getting COVID, and we would have to do the systems and the processes necessary to make sure that they were tested, make sure that they were not COVID positive, so they would not infect others around them, including the children. And so we did use some of the COVID money made available through Congress to address the COVID-related concerns and services necessary for migrant children.
I see my time's running out in 7 seconds. Secretary, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, gentleman from Texas.
the ranking member raises a number of examples that concern me, and I think it would be helpful if you could put the information you were going to give Secretary Becerra into the record so that we can evaluate those, determine if those were decisions made in the huge bill that we approved or by state and local governments using that money or where it was spent. I don't think any but the last you discussed had anything to do with the Secretary of Health and Human Services, but it's something that our committee in our oversight role certainly need to look to see if this money was misspent in any way. So I just ask that you do that.
Gentleman willing to do that?
I am more than happy to submit to the record. Also, I would love for this committee to have an oversight hearing so we could look into how the money was spent. We've sent a request to the chairman, and it would be awesome if we could just not submit it to the record, but actually have a hearing and a discussion of oversight of $2 trillion.
Thank you.
I thank both of you. Now recognize the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Chakowski, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. Always great to see you. I wanted to talk about seniors, no surprise, because I am the chair of the Task Force on Aging and Family.